You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
Boom! This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
Misa back.
Welcome to Making Tracks Reaction Chat. We're here to talk all about Season 2 of Andor, a Star Wars story. Mark Mulcaster, my wonderful co-host, will join us very shortly. But I'm here with Joe from Rule the Galaxy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I always say it's a big deal for me to be here. You were one of the shows that made me and my son start Rule the Galaxy. And here we are 5 years later and 230 episodes later and still going strong. But you and a few other hosts were the people that motivated us to do it. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Always a pleasure to talk Star Wars with you and have you as a guest on the show. Season 2 of Andor. It's one of those shows, one of those seasons that I think we're going to be talking about forever, really. I don't think this show's going away in our sort of line of thought. It's fresh as a daisy right now. And I'm grateful that it is because we've just had 10 hours of Star Wars. We've had 4 movies, essentially, over the course of a month. I mean, I don't think we've ever had quite so much content come to us in such a compact amount of time.
No, I would agree with you. I mean, even 7 years of Clone Wars was spread out over how long? A decade.
Yeah.
4 seasons of Rebels, but they did that in actual year-by-year seasons. So having 4 movies in 4 weeks is a lot. And Tony Gilroy was correct when he said podcasters are going to hate this because my wife would look at us and it'd be 2 hours into the show and she'd go, "You're not done talking yet." And I was like, well, we have 3 hours to cover.
Yeah.
It was just a lot. But overall, to see that much come up in a short period of time is amazing. And for guys your age and my age who grew up with the original trilogy and then waiting 3 years, to have all this Star Wars content, good or bad, is an amazing thing.
It is. It's a lot, but it's a good lot. So thank you, Tony Gilroy. I think we'll take that because he's right. It was one of those scenarios that could have gone south really quickly in that we're sort of overwhelmed with stuff and there's too much to cover and too much to take in. But actually, because I think we've been sort of preconditioned over recent years because we've been getting more and more Star Wars more and more often, I think we were just about receptive enough to soak it all up. Our aged, shrinking brains can just about hold the information.
Well, I think what's really cool is, again, going back to the OT, I think I saw you mention something on X that you were calling it the Stardust trilogy or something like that. Yeah. And in all reality, you look at it and you think, what was the core to the fandom? And the core was that original trilogy, and especially to the masses being that movie that came out in 1977, Star Wars. Well, now thinking about, okay, we had a little over 2 hours of just that. And then from that blurb in the opening crawl, we get another movie and we think that's fantastic. But now we've got pretty much 20 hours of material that leads into that Star Wars, that original movie. So you think about it, I mean, that's 24 hours or more of just that little snippet of time in the Star Wars universe.
We're blessed. There's no doubt about it. We're blessed to be able to sort of come out the other side of Andor Season 2 and look back and think that through Season 1, we got those amazing stories in Rick's Road, and then 1 year later, and those blocks of 3 to sort of move us on the year every time, right up to the end, right up to Jeddah, Kyber, Urso, or whichever way around it said, that takes us right to the doorstep of Rogue One, which of course takes us right to the start of A New Hope. So that new trilogy idea, of course it isn't, it's just a fan construct, but just the thought of those 3 projects, if you like, sitting as one block, it's a bit like the analogy I made, it was a bit like the Genesis trilogy in Star Trek 2, 3, and 4. The search for Spock and the death of him in 2 and the redemption or the sort of bringing him back in Star Trek 4. that's its own little trilogy within the broader series. It feels very much like Andor is part of that.
Well, I think everyone was expecting, and I think it paid off well for him to finish up in that outfit. Everyone lined up where they were supposed to be. It's like, take your spots, ready. We're getting ready to shoot Rogue One.
True.
Everybody in place. Here we go. So I think it did a really good job. It started us off. It did universe building and really added depth to that part or era of Star Wars. And then it finished really well where it was a seamless merge right into Rogue One, which then, of course, Leia merges right into Star Wars. So I think it was very well done. And I'm very excited about it. One thing that really stood out to me, and, I'll say Star Wars people, it's almost a religion, right? And then you've got the secular world that aren't Star Wars fans, but will go watch Star Wars items. If you look at Andor, the people who do podcasts or the people who are in a cosplay or go to conventions, this was just a smorgasbord of things for us to take in.
Yeah.
But I think if you would have taken this because of the acting, because of the scenery, the music, the universe they were building, if you take this entire series and let's say you place it a few years before World War I or a few years before World War II, and you say, we're going to do this same thing, but it's going to be the spies and so forth leading into those big events, I think the secular world would say, this is incredible TV or movies or whatever. They are probably, there's a lot of people who maybe just put off to thinking about watching 20 hours of Star Wars. But if you put this on streaming on Netflix or Amazon Prime, right now that would be skyrocketing because all those people who are into streaming and binge watching would think this is just incredible dialogue, acting, and so forth. So I think it's a very cool way to look at it to where we eat it up. I'm hoping that the general public does the same thing.
It's funny, some Star Wars fans who are a little bit reticent about Andor complaining it's a bit too slow and it's dragging and there's not enough going on. And yet, from my point of view, and I'm assuming yours, because I can tell from your enthusiasm, that if we've not seen everything, we've been there for everything from day one, from when A New Hope came out. So we're at least aware of all the various elements, be it animated, books, comics, role-play games, everything. We're kind of aware, computer stuff. There's a gamut of things that Star Wars has bled into. One thing I can't sort of bash Andor with, even with a soft stick of celery, is it's boring or it's not interesting or there's nothing going on. Because the best analogy I could think of in the moment when I was talking to Mark on a recent episode of Making Tracks was, did you see Hawkeye?
Yes.
There was that great scene where Kate and Yelena in the warehouse just sit down on opposite sides of the table and they just talk. There's a bit of fighting, there's a bit of scuffle and such, but it's all about the drama and the tenseness, if that's even a word, of them just conversing and the tension building, and you kind of know something's coming, but you don't know quite when. And it's just this whole build, and you've got two really great actresses proper going toe-to-toe. And Andor felt like that to me, 12 episodes. Just every one just felt like that. So there was nothing about Andor to me that felt remotely boring.
Well, one of my favorite series of all time is Turn, Turn. I'm not sure if you've ever watched it.
No.
It is all about George Washington's spies in the American Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War, whatever.
Yeah. Yes.
It was very much like this. And I think, there were a lot of people who would say, I can't watch it because it's not action and fighting all the time, or it's not get to the point all the time. But all the little secrets and all the little layers that were in that were very much in Andor.
Yeah.
And you see that it can't just be, hey, I've got an idea, quick answer, let's go do this. A lot of this plays out over 4 and 5 years. You have to put those layers in place and that network in place that really isn't just easy to build. I mean, think about the chances you have to take to go and say, I have friends everywhere to someone, right? That groundwork has to be laid for it to work. And so it reminded me very much of Turn. And I think if your listeners have not watched that, they would get an interesting point of view on something very similar to what Andor is.
I'm curious to see that now. I've not heard of that. I'll seek it out. Because we don't need to see the action, I think it would have been so easy for Tony Gilroy or his writing team to go, let's throw in a little X-Wing battle here. Let's throw in a little side mission there. And there aren't any of that. It's not there. We didn't, I think, I'm surprised there wasn't more of an outcry, waggle the air quotes, that Vader and Palpatine and Tarkin aren't on screen at all. They're mentioned, but they're not seen at all. I don't think Vader's even mentioned, but obviously Palpatine and Tarkin are. So I love the fact that you didn't see those guys. I would have been equally happy to see them. Sure. But I think it showed great restraint from Tony Gilroy to have a broad enough view of the wider saga to go, this series isn't about Darth Vader walking in and owning the room or Krennic going to see the Emperor. It's enough to know that Krennic has just seen the Emperor or Partagaz has got to report to the Emperor. You don't need to see that. You know, it's enough to know that that's happening because we're on a different level of the skyscraper at this point. You know, we get to the top of the tower in Return of the Jedi. I've literally just watched it again. And again, just having seen Andor, there's just little things that just have a heightened element of meaning behind it, which I think just speaks to what you've just said. It's just laying the groundwork for everything that comes after it. Yeah,
it definitely does. And I think you mentioning like Vader, for example, even though someone like that is not there, their presence is felt because of what you know is going on around it. Yes. You know, in the background that is there. And you know, in Rogue One, you see Vader come in and do that hallway scene. So that is always there. Now, I will say, we have 4 hosts on Rule the Galaxy, and we all look at this show in a different way. I ate it up. I think my only regret in it was not enough K2SO. Yeah, I think K2SO, man, when he came in, it hit perfect. And you know, I'm thinking maybe they could have put that up 3 or 4 episodes earlier and got that banter going a little quicker. But outside of that, the drama, it was enough action, the spy, the looking back kind of in the French resistance kind of feeling of Gorman. Yeah. You know, you had all that stuff going on. Alfie always says, when it comes to Andor, I love everything about it, but it's not very entertaining. That's his quote. Now, that's just one of my hosts. He's like, he goes, the acting's perfect. The scenery's perfect. Everything's great. It just doesn't entertain me. And I think that's because he wanted it faster, more intense, right? He wants George Lucas pushing it through the door. Yeah. But Brent, one of our hosts, is like, this is all new. This is all world building that makes me enjoy Star Wars even more, right? But Alfie did say, and I'm not going to jump too far ahead, but just to sprinkle this in, he said, wouldn't it have been fantastic if we didn't have to ever see Vader, but after Krennic put the gauntlet down on Dedra and she's sitting in that room alone, what if something like a door opens, you see that droid with the needle come around the corner and you hear the footsteps and the breathing and she just turns, right? Yeah. Never see him. You just know what's coming. Now, I'm perfectly fine with her ending up in prison because I think it played so well to say she was finally, her whole life she'd been captured, but she finally realized she was captured or in a prison. While Clea, her whole life, you could say she was free, but she wasn't actually free until the end. So seeing that poetry that George always liked to talk about really played in. So her being in prison was fine, but that might have been a tasty little scene to just hear that breathing and have her turn, look towards the door and know, now I am done. So, but everybody's getting a different point of view on it. I just thought that was a great possible scene that could have been thrown in there. Yeah, definitely. And I think you could probably work your way through those latter episodes and pepper in moments like that. And it would have been hugely satisfying to see these characters, but also because I'm pretty sure Tony Gilroy, like Filoni, he can pretty much put in whatever he wants. But I really appreciate the restraint of Gilroy not. Just to that point about the George way of faster, more intense, or Filoni's way of telling stories, that's not Gilroy's way. Neither are Gilroy's way. And so I love the thought that, even go back to the OT, you know, Empire is so different to Star Wars because Evan Gershner had different sensibilities. And Richard Marquand had, again, different sensibilities for Jedi. I know George had more of a hand on the wheel for Jedi than he probably did for Empire. But nevertheless, all of it worked out great and they've all got their own flavour and feel. You're not going to find 2 films that are much more different than Force Awakens and Last Jedi, for example. So they're very different sensibilities, different styles, different flavours and tastes. So Star Wars has done this forever and a day. But going back to Andor,
just so many elements of it work so well, to the degree that you mentioned Claire, and I'm ardently hoping that somebody somewhere is sitting down going, Andor, the show Andor, kind of discovered Elizabeth Delau.
Oh.
And she feels like she's about to go rocketing off to a great career because she could act the socks off anyway. She just went toe-to-toe with Stellan Skarsgård and walks away with a fist raised. That was fantastic. And those two characters were such a powerhouse couple in the sense of what they did for the rebellion. The thought that the whole speech about Luthen's speech back in season 1 when he's talking to Lonnie in the lift, I'm paraphrasing, but he's basically saying, I'm doing all this for somebody else. This fight isn't for me, it's for somebody else. It's not till you get to the end of season 2 and you realise Luthen's talking about Claire. He's doing this for her. And when you see that flashback, and I'm not mad keen on flashbacks, but it worked so well, it's all for her.
Hello, I'm Dennis Lawson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
I'm also not key on flashbacks, especially if they don't fit correctly, right? Like they're okay. They're a good tool, but this one was very well done. And it sprinkled just enough in there to whet your appetite to say, oh, I get where this came from, or I see the steps that they're taking. And I've heard some people, there's so many people with anger and whatever out there in the community. And they're like, well, I don't feel like she was trained enough to do what she did in the hospital. Well, we're not going to get 9-10 years or 15 years of her training. They just wanted to give you enough to realize it happened. It was there. And Luthen, he was a dominating figure and knew exactly what he wanted to do and wanted to get her that retribution for her and being left like she was and everything else. So I absolutely loved it. I know I heard you guys talking about it, but when we left this show and we finished this show, one of my first thoughts was Clea was so powerful, and we had still so many alive characters that I wasn't sure we'd see alive at the end, that I thought, as well done as Lost Stars was in the original trilogy, that book that let you see everything that happened from a different perspective, having a Clea / Mon Mothma / Vel, whoever else series that took place during the original trilogy, just again, we know they just had a conversation with the Emperor in Andor. Well, you could do all those scenes and saying, I just left a meeting with such and such, and fill in the blanks with little things as we head towards the second Death Star, as we see Hoth, these people still played a part in that, or could have still played a part in it. And I think Clea would be just such a key figure from learning from Luthen to be able to put that together.
And isn't it so cool that, and just to say, we're now joined by Mark Mulcaster. You've made it through the Coruscant traffic. Well done, mate. Hello.
Hi, Mark.
How are you doing?
I was just talking so much that we couldn't even do the proper intro. Sorry.
That's all right.
It's fine. We'll do it in post. It's all good. It's all good. That's what AI is for. It's all good. But no, we come at the back end of this show, and we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of season 2 in a moment.
Sure.
But we come at the back end of this show, and there's, as me and Marco talked about on the show, there's so many characters that you want to see more of Clea. We know we're going to see more of Mon Mothma. I'd be amazed if she wasn't in season 2 of Ahsoka, at least, which is quite a way down the timeline, but she's there. And other characters that did get out the other side. And now, of course, we know what happens to Cassian. We know what happens to K2SO. We know what happens to Bail Organa. Hats off to Benjamin Bratt. I thought he did a great job. So there's certain characters, their destiny is a lot more truncated. But there's other characters that we know, again, Mon, that runs right through and through the original trilogy and out the other side. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think there's definitely more thematic stuff we could pick up.
And I did just see an article, I think today, where rumor mill was Bix. There are some storylines with Bix in the future at Lucasfilm or Star Wars or whatever, which great. Like I mentioned in our show, it's kind of a new hope from that point of view, right? Luke was a new hope for Star Wars, but here she is holding baby Andor, and maybe that's another new hope that we're going to have sprinkled in there.
Well, babies are quite popular. We've had Baby Yoda, so why not? Yeah.
Baby Cass.
Yeah, Baby Cass.
Better than Mama Cass, which I did enjoy her music, but just keep the baby away from sandwiches.
Very good.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, dear. Earning your crust there. Very good. So let's get into season 2. We join the story a year after the end of Rick's Road. We're sort of meeting the characters in various new places. And one of the things that really worked well in season 2 was because every 3 episodes is stepping forward 12 months. So each block is very much its own snapshot of time. And I think from Lucasfilm's point of view, they must be happy as Larry because they've got all this storytelling real estate that they can throw books and comics and other stories into there. Coming back into the first 3 episodes, both guys, whatever your thoughts are, how did it feel getting back into Andor? Because we've got the drama of Rick's Road in real life 3 years behind us, but in story time only 12 months behind us. So what was the vibe? I'll put it to you, Mark. I think you deserve to talk after driving through all those fumes.
Yeah, thanks. So I think if somebody had told me, if you had told me when you had watched it like 60 months ago or something,
what can I say?
And said, oh, the first 3 episodes is going to basically be focused around the wedding, I'd be like, okay, yeah, interesting. And it kind of was. And I think actually, like if you weren't really on board with Andor, and if we hadn't have had like the first season and kind of knew the style, the writing, and the pace and stuff, and even though the first block was a lot more kind of cutty and jumped around a bit, I think this would have been a harder sell. I mean, I know I saw a few people online who were like, "Do you know what? I'm kind of done with this already." But I'm just like, but this is a whole point with this show. Yeah, it's like you've got to pay attention. It's all there, like everything that you need to know about the differences all the way through the show. There's nothing that happens really off screen per se. It's all there. It's just not out there front and center, which makes it like just such an enjoyable kind of rewatchable show.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you're going to make, I'm going to make a weird analogy now. If Star Wars was cakes, I would say The Mandalorian and those shows are like a really nice trifle. It's there, it's immediate, it's tasty, and it's fantastic. Andor is a Christmas cake when you have to just feed in the whiskey and the rum for weeks and weeks and weeks, let it all soak in, and then you eat it, and it's delicious, and it's the nicest thing you've had all day. But you've got to take your time making it.
And you get slightly drunk if you do. If you eat
exactly
too much
that.
of it.
Exactly that. What do you think, Joe? I mean about Andor, not cakes.
Well, I like cake. I don't eat as much of it as I should because I just can't. Just anyway. But I think all of it was good because it started laying the groundwork for where everyone stood. Okay, we left you after Rick's Road. Here's where everybody is now. Here's the path that we're on with each one of them. There were some, at times they seemed odd, like the guy stuck on Yavin when we didn't know it was Yavin, that kind of stuff stood out to where it was like, where are we going with this? Okay, I see now we're laying the groundwork of the rebels actually don't know they're all working together, right? And so you see that post, but during you're watching going, well, are we just going to spend an hour with Cassian in the jungle? What are we doing here? But overall, once you recap it and look at everything, seeing the growth and where everything stands, and now the wedding's going to happen, and how what's the guy's name? I'm blanking on the criminal.
Skoldos.
Yeah. I mean, seeing that now he's brought, okay, I'm part of society now, right? Because I'm married into the family, and seeing the traditions that are going on there. While Cassian's facing what he's facing, which, by the way, that opening scene with the TIE Avenger was fantastic. Yeah. I mean, it was a great way to start it, get everybody's blood pumping. But then seeing the groundwork of where everybody was, I had just done a rewatch. I think we had talked about it a while back, and seeing that rewatch and then hopping right in, I felt comfortable as can be. I was like, okay, all the key characters are here. I know where we're going with everything. And they're laying the groundwork for what's coming next, and I'm a big believer that sometimes Star Wars needs that. There's a lot of people who will say, well, the Phantom Menace, right? So different. And there's so much things they have to lay down before you get to the action of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. But let's face it, if you don't lay all that groundwork and put that stuff in front of everybody, that's a lot to catch up on. So having these first 3 episodes which still ended with a lot of passion and a lot of things going on, still I felt lay the groundwork and put everybody in place and let you know, okay, here's where we stand moving forward. Let's go. And it was off to the races after that. And I thought Genevieve O'Reilly was fantastic in that wedding, and seeing the emotions up and down, and poor Tay, right? I mean, wasn't that his name? Tay,
Tay Colmer.
Yeah. I mean, seeing what happened to him, all because he did all this work for her and Luthen and for Skuld, the criminal, and then he's the one who gets axed because we don't ever see it, but he's the one who gets axed because he put everything out and together for them.
Yeah, but he was a liability, man, wasn't he? That was the problem. He's the one he's come to the wedding, and he's strong arming, Mon and Matt, basically kind of saying, look, we need to, everybody else has done really well out of this, except for me. I was only putting my neck on the line. And of course, a pattern that we see repeated for the series. And obviously, Luthen hears about that, realizes that's a liability, that's a loose end that needs to be tied up. And yeah, he goes on a one-way taxi ride with Cinta.
Yeah. But it says a lot about the scenario that he's the guy that puts his neck on the line, and he's the one that gets chopped because he's having personal issues. And you've got Luthen going, we need a number, get a number. How much is it going to cost to buy this guy or pay this guy off? But that he's not saying that to Mon. He's made the decision. He's already called Cinta in. And we see it again, and he does it himself with Lonnie, way down in episode 10. Poor Lonnie that puts everything on the line. I mean, literally. And we know he's got a wife and a daughter, and he dies. And at that point, it's the rebellion getting off Coruscant, as we find out later in the episode. I'm skipping ahead, obviously, but the point being is that Luthen, he's that guy that will make that decision, and you can totally see why he could never go to Yavin. Kleia, they can just about trust enough, because Kleia's been dishing out work to Vel, dishing out work to Cassian. They know her as a working partnership. They only know Luthen from being given instructions. It's a slightly different dynamic, and in the same way that they don't trust Saw Gerrera, who we now know has just been sniffing car exhaust fumes for about 10 years, that and rightly so, that he would never be welcome on Yavin, and he'd never go because he doesn't trust them, and all the other stuff that goes with that. That if Luthen turned up on Yavin, you see how they treat Cass. Draven confines Willman to his quarters. There's that proper military code has come in. That's not the world of Cassian Andor particularly, and it's definitely not the world of Luthen Rail.
No,
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, but there's also a part of me that thinks that on some level, as Kleia kind of gets that realization of what she's helped build by the end of Yavin, you kind of think that if Luthen was there, because other than Mon Mothma and Cassian, they haven't really had any kind of face-to-face interaction. And as Cassian says to Bail, kind of says actually you're not that dissimilar. I mean, and we see it, through the blocks that basically Luthen has caused, the disharmony, because he's the one who basically puts the cat amongst the pigeon and kind of says to Cassian that, Bail's team has got an inside man on. So therefore, Bail kind of loses face a little bit, because he's meant to kind of be up there with Mon, kind of saying, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to kind of fight the good fight from here and hold everybody off from that and kind of deflect. And so, he's kind of taking that. And then also, the same with I guess the military guys, they're like you said, they want the order, but Luthen's kind of, I think his whole MO really is kind of causing chaos to an extent.
Would you put it past Luthen to have put that cat amongst the pigeons in Bail's group?
Probably not, he could quite easily have done that, but I kind of think that by the end of, really from the point of that Gorman massacre onwards, Luthen is starting to feel that actually, things are kind of coming to a head and closing in a little bit. There's definitely that vibe, but actually, he says we've run out of perfect. He says that to Claire when he's off to meet Lonnie, as in we're just going to have to deal with whatever we got. We have to make do.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds. Bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
The meeting of the ISB / Krennic / propagandist, all that about Gorman was so reminiscent to a Nazi propaganda meeting and what we're going to do behind the scenes that the whole group of our military and our ISB don't know about. And if you're not in this room, you don't get to know. That was a fantastic scene. It was a little odd seeing that like 1950s real movie going on promoting the Gorman
just
thing.
A little bit.
Yeah, that was like, where are we going with this? And then obviously another key part in the first three was the big story with the Imperial leader. I forget his name, but
Lieutenant, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Buttface, Lieutenant Buttface.
Let's call him that.
Yeah.
I've heard you guys talk about it, and I would say this: if you're putting this in Mandalorian, that's probably not going to work. If you're putting this in Ahsoka, this isn't going to work. Obviously, Rebels and Clone Wars, that's not going to work.
No.
But there are now enough layers and levels of Star Wars to where this show, it did work. Let's face it, you don't see scenes like that usually in movies or series. There are some, but not in Star Wars. So to see that scene, you're sitting there going, huh? I mean, this is becoming very real. You know, this is real world. Let's face it, in military history, the military leaders would go in, they take their women, they take their drink, they take their whatever, they dominate that area, and boom, then they leave.
Well, that's imperial colonialism, front and center right there. So, but I think that's, as you say, that kind of like something like that has to be dealt with in a decent way. And not every single Star Wars is going to be able to support that kind of storyline, and nor should it really. No. I think some, you need to see a bit of this, and this is a perfect case because really this is like, we need to see the Empire not just kind of in the, they've got the big mechanical kind of like AT-ATs and stuff like that, just they can invade, but this is about like the insidious nature of actually what they're like when they're still trying to kind of like rule the galaxy, and no pun intended, and
thank you,
but also kind of still win the hearts and minds of the local citizens and stuff. They're coming in. So it was insidious in its nature, but I think very well written and beautifully laid out on film. So,
and it's interesting as we speak today. It's a year today or a year next year. This time next year is when Mando and Grogu comes out, which thematically and pacing wise and visually and every other measure will feel and be very, very different to Andor. And you're not going to get a scene like that, as you say, in a show like that. But I suppose when you've got a mature show like this, a prestige show, as Mark says quite often, which is the perfect way of describing Andor. And just to say, it's just been nominated at the National Television Awards here in the UK, so you can vote now and have Andor be your favourite returning drama, or Genevieve or Diego be your favourite dramatic actor. So already it's getting into the award season for Andor season 2, which is crazy. But the point being is that it wouldn't work for every show, but it definitely does work for this show. And I think it's because there's an instant retribution in that particular scene, in a way that in a lot of other elements of the show, Tony Gilroy and the writing team very smartly, in a lot of ways, leave certain things open. Certain characters are just bookended. Krennic actually comes out of this pretty well because he's the boss character in this show. He's the Tarkin of Andor season 2 because he didn't need Tarkin. Tarkin's Rogue One's boss character in that sense. But, he moves into that slightly depleted. It's a little bit like just reading the Legacy of Vader comic, and Kylo Ren is asking, have we still got the capability to level a planet? He's talking about Naboo. This is obviously way out in the First Order era. And you realise when you think about it that because Force Awakens and Last Jedi literally overlap. The start and the end of each film overlaps. It's a 4-hour movie pretty much as plays. That within no time at all, they lost their Death Star and they lost their executor. They lost their big ship and they lost their battle station in no time. So really, when you actually think about it, the First Order is quite depleted. No wonder they needed Exegol. No wonder they needed all the other stuff. But at this point of time, now the word of the Death Star's out. Partagaz says it. It's a miracle we've kept it a secret for this long, but the Emperor's got no truck with that. I'm sorry, Leo, I can't protect you, and all that conversation we get near the end. Just what I'm long-winded saying is all the machinations, all the military toing and froing and levels, and Dedra thinking that Hart is still on side because they work together. He doesn't give a stuff about their past. He's working for himself. I'm not in it for the glory. Are you? Partagaz, arrest them, then make them famous. All these little lessons that you keep picking up throughout the season. I think that the peppering in of just these little moments calibrate your enthusiasm. That needs to be on a t-shirt. All these little moments are just absolutely priceless.
Yeah,
I am working on that display. I am working on that design.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, coming out of the first sort of block of episodes and moving further into the season, I mean, we've reached Gorman. We know from that meeting that Joe just alluded to that Gorman's in their sights. It's got the deep substrate calcite that they need. There's no way of faking it. There's no way of cheating it. They've got to drill it out. We know from thinking back through the season that they've already got their eye on Jeddah because of the kyber crystals. We know that the unlimited power program, or whatever they want to call it, is just a cover for the Death Star. We know what Dedra is going to be doing when she gets to Narkina 2, as it is. I think it's the women's prison. You see a couple of other inmates in there with us. Orange is the new black. So that all these pieces are there and together, and it's all starting to happen. But as we're working our way through the season, it's so elegantly revealed, isn't it? Just the writing of it is so clever. I think it unfolds as you watch it, but I think going back and watching season 2 again, that's where we'll really benefit from it.
Yeah.
It's so funny. You're talking about section by section, and I have to remind myself, okay, what did happen in the next block? And then what happened in the next block? Because they all blur together, right? Like I know Gorman and the massacre happens in the third block, but it feels like because 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9 almost merge in together, right?
Yeah,
like the storyline is continuous in that whole time frame. But I really liked seeing Andor, and I think the shots of Cassian were so well done, where they would show him from different angles and reflections and different things like that, to where when he was playing that part. And I'm hoping that was in the second block, because in my head it was in the second block. Because if it's not,
when he's on Gorman for the first time,
was he? Yeah, that was him, right? I Have Friends Everywhere. Wasn't he in that?
Yeah,
or maybe it was What a Festive Evening. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's quite. I mean, the cinematography across the whole series has just been standout. I mean, everything about this whole show. And I think Gorman, especially, bearing in mind that they ended up having to kind of set half of series on Gorman because the set was so expensive because it's so big. But then, you can't really kind of. I think the way they've done it, the way they set it up, so it's just slowly. Tensions are building in the first, even the first thing, like the heist, for example, is just like they've really, like, Tony Gilroy is like a master of who was it? Actually, I think it was Bo Wilmington who wrote the second block. But I mean, him and Tony, they bounce like the scripts backwards and forwards. So, but it's always suspense, and then you get even more suspense in the final. Gorman block, of seeing different things and happening at the same time, which is kind of a key to kind of suspense storytelling, is seeing different perspectives of the same thing.
But you made a great point on the show the other day, Mark, when you said, and like you say, I know I remembered it because it was such a unique thing. It was that you had these 5 episodes on Gorman, and there's a real world aspect of, a bit like season 1, having all that sort of ferrets because they built ferrets. So why wouldn't you want to make the most of that? But with this, it I wouldn't say it forced it. It a blessing in a way, because you made the great point that what other world in Star Wars, maybe outside of Tatooine, but I don't even think Tatooine has got a culture anything like we've seen from Gorman. The world building is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, for and bearing in mind that there's bits that we still didn't see because they had to truncate the heist, and that was meant to kind of go off onto a train heist, and you're going to go and see the actual spiders and stuff. They kind of like the story, they scripted all that out, but that was a budgetary thing. And I guess that's the thing that we forget is that it's Star Wars, and this is still like high end storytelling. However, it's still kind of like they're compressed to TV times and TV budgets to an extent. But yeah, I mean, the thought that's gone through in the world building in this and just for how everything. I mean, and yes, I think there's on one hand you could say it is it's a negative thing that I think Gorman for some people actually felt like the least Star Wars planet that we've ever been to, because it felt a little bit too on the nose of being like French resistance and like that northern kind of like European kind of thing. And also actually when you look in the cafe, that whole scene, if you were to look at that, you could take that scene out, and if you were to just show somebody a couple of frames of that, I don't think they'd be able to say this is Star Wars. There's nothing there to suggest it. No. But we know because we're watching it, and so it's fine. But I think you kind of need that as well, because if everything looked, like Tatooine or like a Death Star, it wouldn't work. And it was just the nice contrast between when we're cut back to Coruscant and we're seeing that brutalist architecture with all the hard edges and the tight angles and stuff, and then we go to this lovely open kind of plaza which is very symmetrical and circular, and everything's kind of molded into one another, and it kind of blends really well. It kind of creates a nice juxtaposition between like the two different kind of like, I guess, like societies that we had at the time.
Isn't it amazing that they can take a planet like Gorman, which 90% of even Star Wars fans before recently didn't know much or not heard much about.
Yeah.
And do so much world building on this to where the language, the culture, the apparel, the artwork, the architecture, all that, you feel like, let's face it, we've been on Tatooine, how many movies, and basically, it's a hut and sand. There you go. It's huts and sand. That's pretty much it.
What type of hut do you mean, Joe? Come on.
Yes,
I need some clarification.
Living huts and just huts. Yes. But I mean, you leave Gorman not only feeling like you've seen and been involved in a new world and been somewhere new, but then you really feel when the destruction and the terrible things happen to it, because it has built it up so much for you, and you see what the society was before the Empire came in. I mean, it's a place where I would sit there and go, I'd like to go there on vacation.
Yeah,
right.
Really nice. Yeah,
yeah.
Had Sorrento vibes. It was a beautiful place.
I mean, to your point, I think it's in, episode 4 or 5. You've got Mon walking around, and she's talking about Gorman. She's like, "It's Gorman. Like, what the hell? Like, why is the Empire there?" It's like, it's
But it's another one of those things where you look at Naboo, for example, back in the Phantom Menace, which again, I think the parallels between Andor as a concept of setting up what's coming later down in the saga, almost for somebody who's completely new to sort of watch it and understand the reasons why things happen later, because it's been backwritten so clever. And also somebody pointed out that I think more than 50% of Star Wars now is a prequel. There's more prequel stories in Star Wars than sequels. That a world like Gorman or a world like Naboo or a world like, I mean, I'm thinking way forward, Kijimi. You don't see Kijimi very much. You see enough of Kijimi to get a sense of those tight little corridors, little stairs everywhere. And it just gave you enough of a vibe that you kind of got what that world was about. And then boom, it's blown up. So Alderaan's beautiful. We know we saw it, a lot of it in Kenobi, a little bit in Sith, but a lot in Kenobi. That's gone. Gorman, you've got to assume Gorman's gone. There's these wonderful sort of middle class almost, or upper class in the case of Chandrila and Alderaan, worlds that just don't make it. It's almost like the Emperor's aiming for these beautiful, ornate, hopeful places and just smashing them to bits because, it takes the wind out of people's sails.
I talk about Italy way too much with you guys and others, and you look at the fascist part of Italy where everything was stone and block and darker and no curves to it and things like that. And that's what it reminded me of is you go to Coruscant where everything is that way. It's not built for comfort. It's not built for aesthetics and for look. It's just structure, right? It's just there. You live in it. There you go. And then you go to some place like Gorman and you think I could go and have a coffee and walk around this courtyard and see the beautiful countryside. And you're right. The Emperor really has no care for those things one bit whatsoever, even though he's from Naboo, where that should be in his, in his DNA. Yeah. So
I've got a question for you, Joe. One of the characters, I mean, all of us have spoke about Bix, we spoke about Luthen and Lonnie and Cleia and Vel, all these other characters, Saw Gerrera, that have really been deeply investigated in conversation on podcasts, online, and here on Making Tracks. One character, and this is the weird thing that struck to me, one character that doesn't actually get spoken about an awful lot is Cassian Andor himself. So when you look at Cassian's journey throughout season 2 of Andor, what do you make of his journey? Because he's the guy that we take forward into Rogue One. We know his destiny. And I think watching Rogue One again, it gives us a fresh view of that film when you come into that again. But what do you make of his development? Because he's coming into season 1 a lot more, the first episodes when he's stealing the TIE Avenger, he's a lot more clued up. He's more of he's on program, if you like, with the message that Luthen wants to get across in getting people on side to do what needs to be done. But he's still a work in progress, and that work continues throughout the season. So what do you make of Cassian Andor's journey?
I just really look and see that there's peaks and valleys, and you see that this is a man who he lost his entire family at the very beginning. Then he lost his stepfather. Then he lost his mother. He's really a little bit at a time losing things. Everything keeps being taken away from him. And that's, in this section right here that we're talking about, 4, 5, and 6, he is so committed to Bix at that time that he's not going to go out and do the jobs. He's not going to go do. That's why it was such a difficult thing for him to even get to Gorman, if I'm not mistaken, is because he didn't want to leave Bix, who was going through, let's say, so we didn't even talk about the nightmares that she was going through, right? Yeah. So he was like, this is the one person I can commit to, and I can make my life surrounded around this one person, because everything else has been taken away or I've lost. Even Brasso, he loses him, right? So I see that filled him with joy to be able to say, I'm going to take care of her. And he was ready to give it all up. We all know that. And I miss this when the Force Healer originally, and I think that's in 7, the messenger, right? You're the messenger. And we know, Bix, we know there's something you're carrying that if he knew about it, he would never leave, right? He would never leave you, and he'd never be a part of the rebellion. So there was a lot of growth and a lot of sadness, but he still kept it to where he was committed, and to see him have that conversation with Vel I think it was Vel, right at the end, before, where she said, "Hey, she's still out there waiting for you." And she wants to see you, and hey, maybe when this is over, I'll get back with her, right? I'll go see her, I'll go visit her, or I'll reconnect. Here's somebody who was just so many things taken away, so much sadness, still committed, and at the same time just heartbroken. And so it does make you look at Rogue One differently, because now that he did have something in his life that he really, if given the opportunity, would have gone back to and given all this up. So I think it was well played throughout the whole show. I think there were ups and downs. You saw him angry, you saw him sad, you saw him committed. But yeah, I think he did a fantastic job throughout the whole thing. And I mentioned to you before Mark came on that K2SO really brought some of that joy back into his life when he could make those quips and he could have that fun with him and Melchi. That did fill a little bit of a void in him. You saw him he actually smiled, right? He was in a little bit better of a place in those last 3. and then we know his ending after that. But yeah, I mean, ups and downs all the way through, but a very committed person.
I think one of the things that stood out to me was as he's leaving at the end, as he's going off to see Tivik on Kafrene and into Rogue One, watering the plants. He had every intention of coming back. He wasn't. It wasn't a suicide mission. It wasn't a Dirty Dozen thing. He was just going off on a mission, and the circumstances took him into the events of Rogue One and that ultimate sacrifice concept, and just a thought that he never knew he'd got a kid. Or as far as we know, he never knew. We've got to assume he never knew that was something that Bix did, and she was on Mina Rao, and she's with the rest of her friends, and Beta, of course, and that's that. But even if he had have known, I've got a son on Mina Rao with Bix, he would have still done what he did to get the message back to the fleet, and everything that played out would have played out. You know, that was Cassian. That was part of the growth, wasn't it?
It makes me reevaluate my Mount Rushmore of the original trilogy era, right? I mean, we know, and we've talked about on Rule of the Galaxy, you know, you watch the original trilogy and you go, oh, Luke and Han and Leia and, you know, Chewie, and that's, gosh, you know, it's just these people belong up here, but really it's in a short time frame, right? It's in a couple of years, and they got roped into it right there at that point. And then you look at these 5 years leading up to A New Hope, where all these people like Luthen, like Cassian, I jokingly said, you know, after Return of the Jedi, there should have been statues of a Luthen, of a Cassian, you know, of people like that. But so many of them, nobody ever knew they even existed.
That's the thing with rebellions, isn't it? They are just the pebbles that pave the way for freedom. And like you said, you know, because the people who do get made statues of are never ones who deserve it.
Look at Palpatine's statue at the end of Jedi coming down. So.
Well, I was going to say, I can guarantee you that Senator Jebbel's got a bloody statue. That guy's we've got to find that one, and we've got to topple that one. If not my second most least favorite Star Wars character, which again is like great because that's just down to obviously the writing and hopefully
and the actor. Yeah.
You know, so let's not hope we run into him.
Hi, this is Jack Parker, Pip from The Acolyte, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
We've seen the Rebellion build. We've seen the Alliance build. We get to see it go from this scrappy little bunch of units from the early episodes on Yavin and no idea what's going on, pyramid scheme kind of logic, to the end of season 2 of Andor, where it's basically the Alliance that we see in Rogue One that needs a prod, but thanks to Jin's wise words and rebellions are built on hope and all that stuff that we learnt on Gorman happens and leads us into A New Hope. What do you make of that progression as well? Because you're seeing the Alliance formulate now throughout those 12 episodes, and it's kind of in the background, but each time you see it, it's a bit more moving towards being an army, which was not something I ever thought of the Rebellion being specifically a regimented, progressional army in the same way as the Empire.
I mean, it's quite a stark contrast from where we see those idiots on the first episode on Yavin, you know, who are playing Rochambeau, or what the hell it is.
Rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly it. That's it. But it has to happen. I mean, and I quite like that it's also not happening front and center, but it's not actually the main story. It's kind of not the whole point of this. And I think it's quite interesting just to see how it's developing. And actually, to your point, it kind of gives us a little bit of scope because you know, that there's still a whole story there. There's a whole story to even, you know, to talk about. Why did I pick Yavin? Whose actually idea was it? Yes, Luthen was using it as a waypoint, but if, like, you know, if he's never really spoken to Draven or somebody, is that come from him, or does that come through?
Yeah,
could it have been Cassian who just said, "Oh yeah, I was stranded on this planet and had these temples, which would be perfect, ideal to hide out in." But it's an interesting. It just kind of ramps up, but when it ramps up, it escalates. It's not like it's just like, oh, there's one ship and two ships. It's like suddenly, like, we're on Yavin. So I'll be interested to see where they go with this extra material.
Yeah, I would think the extra material would be very cool to see that build up on Yavin and why the decision was made.
Yeah.
You know, I also think just like with Clone Wars season 7 and that final Siege of Mandalore, seeing a full cut of Revenge of the Sith and that mixed together would be something I want to see.
Yeah,
I would love to see Rebels and Andor have some way to where they could edit and put episodes of Rebels interspersed with Andor, because those things are going on concurrently,
Yeah,
right?
well, exactly. Yeah.
So
And
it'd be great to flash from here to there, boom, and see how it's all happening at the same time.
And especially actually when Mom gets off of Coruscant and then she gets picked up by the Ghost Crew, Matt. That's really cool, So
I think also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I was just going to say that I think, it was quite interesting because, like, when you're watching Rogue One, you've got General Draven, so he's a general, so like the rank would suggest an importance, but like you never really give like him or Merrick or even Dodonna like the kind of like the thought, but actually like these guys are part of this quorum that they've kind of created. You just kind of think that actually the quorum's probably like Mon and the senators and the actual military are so you've got the executive branch and then you've got what's the other side of a branch? The legislative. Thank you. So
I was going to say the bark, but there you go.
Yeah.
I think it was really cool how we see the end result of it in Mando, but you see that bureaucracy kicks in even during a rebellion.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And you have Luthen and you have Ahsoka, who in Rebels is leading a lot of things and being a fulcrum over here. And Luthen's doing this with Clay over here. And you have all these different spy networks and things going on. And then when the politicians get involved, it's, well, we can't do that because we don't have a quorum. And we can't do that until we all sit down and talk about this. That would never work. I mean, rebellions can't work with that. And that's why Rogue One, they did it without permission, right? They take off and go do this because they're like, look, this is never going to happen if we have to sit and wait for these guys to make this decision.
And that plays forward, I think, as well, doesn't it? Because that's why you have a resistance and a New Republic, because Leia just gets so sick and tired of the bureaucracy. She's like, I'll take the old X-Wings. We're going to go and deal with this First Order threat. You do your thing, you run the galaxy, and I'm going to do this because nothing's happening. You have the whole demilitarization thing that hopefully we'll get to see some of that as we move through the Mando era. But nevertheless, completely that demilitarization element, or rather that bureaucracy element, is so frustrating to watch because you're thinking, learn from history, you idiots. Yeah. They forget all about the Jedi in like 5 minutes. Don't forget the lessons of history, but they do.
Yeah,
I mean, but that's real world, though, isn't it? When you think
totally
about it,
real world. Oh my God,
I mean, what do you need to sort out like a dysfunctional Senate? Well, you need an autocracy. You need an autocrat at the top, telling people like what to do, and
Jar Jar.
Miss, I think so.
I'm very conscious that time is cracking on, and I do want to ask Joe one final question before we let you go. When you sit back now and you've watched all of season 2, and and we know as a trio that we're all going to watch season 2 again. There's moments, there's episodes, there's arcs that are just going to stay with us as Star Wars fans forever and a day. What do you think the big takeaway? It's a big question, but what do you think the big takeaway is from season 2 of Andor?
Wow, I'm not sure if I know of a big takeaway. I just know that I liked the realism of this series, and I liked that this show let people see that I love the Clone Wars, I love Rebels, I love the prequels, I love the original trilogy. The Force Awakens, actually, believe it or not, is a fantastic movie in my opinion. I think there's so much good about it. I go up and down with the other two, but I enjoy them. But to see that I can like something as silly as Ezra being a street rat on a cartoon, and then see a real life where it really felt real life series, an adult based series. Now I don't need rated R and I don't need sexually explicit Star Wars. I don't think anybody really needs that. This went deep enough already. But to see that we can have all those varieties for people, to where my grandson, who's 2, can watch the Young Jedi Adventures, and then I can say, okay, well, here's Resistance, because that's the next kind of kid level thing. Yeah. And we can keep building to where maybe when he's 18 years old, if God willing, I'm still here, I can sit there and go, hey, you want to watch how we got to A New Hope? Do you want to see how this builds from, the end of Revenge of the Sith to this? And to be able to have that and give them that to where people at all different levels can watch this now. And I mentioned Star Wars fans and secular fans, right? Earlier, Mark. And
yeah,
I hope that I hope this kind of a show brings in fans who go, I don't need pew pew, faster, more intense. I need story, and I need character building, and I need depth. And I think we'd all raise our hand and say, oh, you can take A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi and go make 10 hours on each of those. Great. Let's go see that. But this is what we're given. And I think I would like to see their shows like this interspersed with those other things. I still want to see more animation. I still want to see more kid-friendly Star Wars. But I would love it if we could, and I was thinking about this beforehand, so I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but this is what it made me think of. I would like to see a series like this between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, because I think it fits kind of, we got a 9 or 10 year window there. Yeah. There was so much going on behind the scenes, even if it's from the point of view of Palpatine and that side of things, building these things in between there. Sifo Dyas, the clones, all that stuff was going on, and really hardly anybody knew about it. And then if you take and say, how do I make depth into the sequel trilogy? We've talked before about an animated series, but there could be an animated series about Kylo or, Ben Solo and Luke going on adventures in between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. But now let's go take, maybe from the point of view of the First Order or the Resistance, what needed to happen before the sequel trilogy in an adult kind of show like this. So it opened my mind to say, this is out there and they can make it really good if done the right way. So I'm excited about those kind of opportunities.
What about you, Mark?
On one level, this has probably shut a certain portion of fans up who've now kind of got their darker, adult, more kind of mature Star Wars, and it'll be interesting to see like the discourse when we do get Ahsoka season 2, or when Mando and Grogu comes out, and see actually what happens. Like, see if the pushback kind of happens. But then, like, I like this once in a blue moon. I wouldn't want this to be my every Star Wars, because it would probably
it'd be depressing.
It would be depressing.
yeah, it'd be tough. Yeah.
It would be tough, I mean, you get the production designer who did like Chernobyl. It's like, I mean, to design the show, what do you think you're going to get? It's not going to be kind of like Melly Runs and too many Loft Cats anyway. So, but
there was one sort of Loft Cat, wasn't there?
There was one sort of Loft Cat, yeah, exactly. And
poor Lonnie.
I reckon that Loft Cat like cocked his leg up against his leg.
Oh, do you think? Yeah. Like B2?
Totally. I literally, I think that is just the epitome of what's happened. And Lonnie is literally the true rebel, the purest sense of rebel. And I kind of like agree with him, Matt. So let's get some more Lonnie stories.
But at least a 6-inch Black Series figure.
Oh yeah,
or a 3 3/4 inch. If you're purist. So, but it's exciting. At the same time, I feel like we've now, for the time being, like I think we've kind of ticked off this kind of time period. Like you just said, Joe, there's so many different eras. Like, I mean, you could just do like a West Wing prequel style show, couldn't you? And you can have all the machinations that Sidious is doing in the background and stuff, and that would be interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, in terms of like takeaways from Star Wars, I just think it's, from Andor, realizing that actually if you get out of your own way a little bit and just enjoy the Star Wars that's there and really embrace it, I think you get a lot more out of it than if you just sit there watching it passively.
I think we should have a Star Wars show called Hidden Fortress, where you see the Rebel Alliance move to different bases, go to Hoth, find Sullust, do all the other stuff, and follow characters like Claire and Vel and Mothma, and let's get a recast Leia and Luke and just go for it.
Yeah, I mean,
be brave.
Exactly. If we've recast Bail Organa, that pivotal character, then why can't we recast Luke and Leia?
And what more can we say than that? Joe, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Guys, thank you. I wish we had another hour or two to talk, but it's always a pleasure. And I look forward to you guys coming back on Rule the Galaxy soon. We'll have some chats on other things. I'm sure we'll all beat up Andor enough to where we'll have other topics to talk about. But I can't thank you enough. You guys are always so wonderful to have conversations with, and it means a lot that you'd invite me on. And just appreciate it. I really liked Andor. I can't wait to see what's next.
That's fantastic.
Cheers,
Thanks so much, Joe. Cheers.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.